Being competitive means being on time, but unfortunately today we're not on time. We're not very good. And I apologize for the delay, but we had two cabinet ministers joining us, but they were recalled back to by the Prime Minister. One of them, when he arrived, he actually turned around and went back again. So we're waiting for Minister Ghadawali, who will be joining us. We don't want to keep you waiting any longer, so we're going to start. First of all, I want to thank each and every one of you for joining us today. It means a lot to us. I see a lot of familiar faces, people that really understand what competitiveness is about. And today's topic, I think, is extremely important because it's something that we at the NCC have been adopting for years and concentrating a lot on policy advocacy when it comes to employment and the future of this country. The ILO is a very good partner, a very credible entity that the government will listen to. So I'd like to welcome Mr. Iyanatul Islam. He's the Chief of the Employment and Labor Market Policies Branch at the ILO. And Professor Francesco Saraceno will be giving us the presentation today. That is, I think, going to be extremely interesting. As the NCC, I'd like to also welcome His Excellency Minister, Head of CAPMAS, General Bakr Gindi, who is a man we, as Egyptians, now rely heavily on for data. CAPMAS was an area we didn't rely on very much in the past. Data is not very credible, sometimes skewed, but under his leadership this has changed. And without proper data, nobody can make a right decision anywhere. Under his leadership, that is impossible. Professor Hossein Badrawi, the honorary chairman of the ENCC, thank you for coming as well today, Dr. Hossein. The ENCC is, for those of you that don't know us, we are policy advocates. We look at what policies will make us more competitive, and we help advocate those policies so that our rankings change. We don't only depend on our rankings for the global, the GCR, the Global Competitiveness Report, but also the World Bank and other institutions and what they issue. So it's very important that we keep in mind the rankings. It is our only way to benchmark government performance and our country's performance. When it comes to labor, I think it is very essential that we also talk about education. It is impossible, and this is one rank we use very often all the time, it is impossible that Egypt is ranked 139 out of 140 nations in the world. It's a crime, it's something that cannot go on any longer. And we are going to push very hard this coming year on this issue because it affects everything. And I think when it comes to the employment, we as a MENA region have a bombshell that's going to fall on us by the year 2020. We will have 50 million unemployed youth. So this is really a calamity. And a major part of that is why are they unemployed? And in order to avoid that, we have to grow at an average 8% GDP per annum. So, major challenge. So, Minister Ghadawali, can you please come over and... She said no.
Good evening, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Iyanatul Islam, representing the ILO in Geneva. It's a real pleasure and a privilege to be here. My last visit to Cairo was in 2009, so it's lovely to be back and to enjoy the ambience of this particular surrounding and to, of course, have the honor of engaging with you and share some of our ideas. What I'd like to do, if I may, with your permission, is to provide first the specific context to this event and a more general one. I'll start with the specific context, and here I'd like to highlight the role that Dr. Nihal El Megaba played in driving this particular event, because it is a follow-up to an idea that we first had when she led a small delegation on behalf of the Ministry of Planning at the International Training Center here. And the International Training Center, ITC as they call it, for all of those who know, has been around for several decades and is a very important entity of the ILO where our training programs take place. And the idea was that some of the issues that we were discussing there, which were issues pertaining to macroeconomic policy and the role that such a policy framework plays in supporting employment and growth, ought to be shared more widely in a local context, which is why we were here. I would like to then talk briefly about the global context. I think it would be fair to say that following the 2008 global financial crisis and the recession that ensued as a result of that particular crisis, there has been a case of what we would call rethinking macroeconomic policy. It's a particular movement that was initially launched by Olivier Blanchard when he was the chief economist of the IMF, along with some of his colleagues. And we are also participants in that particular rethinking movement. The reason is very straightforward as far as we are concerned. The reason is that when we look at the whole notion of employment, both in terms of its quantitative and its qualitative dimensions, we would like to say that it is a cross-cutting issue and that it is influenced by a complementarity of forces, factors, and interventions. Macroeconomic policy is certainly central to those interventions, and we believe that the current way of thinking has important virtues, but it also has some weaknesses. And as we have taken what we would call a reformist approach, we would like to preserve the strengths of the existing framework while recognizing that we need to move beyond some of its limitations. And it is in that spirit that my friend and colleague, in terms of the way we think and write together, Professor Francesco Saracino, Deputy Director of Innovation, Competition and Research Department at Sciences Po de Paris, would share the global framework, which we call the new consensus on macroeconomic policy. And while the global framework, while important in many respects, has also important limitations. And whether we like it or not, this global framework has been applied across different parts of the world. And one suspects it will continue to be applied in Egypt and elsewhere. And we'd like to suggest perhaps we ought to take a more critical look at that particular new consensus in macroeconomics that we talk about. And that has, in a sense, dominated the academic world, intellectual and policy discourse in different parts of the world. So it is the global context, therefore, that allows us to be here tonight, and we are delighted by the fact that we have this wonderful opportunity to share our thoughts with such an august audience. We would like to say, and take this opportunity to let you know, that we have indeed produced a paper on Egypt itself. It's a paper that's fresh off the press, if you like. It's called Macroeconomic Policy for Employment Creation in Egypt, Past Experience and Future Prospects. It's a paper that the ILO has produced. The authors are Mr. Tariq Haq, a colleague of mine, who authored it with Professor Shahid Zaki from Cairo University. This paper is available on the ILO website. We'll provide a link. And of course, this paper will be appropriately disseminated through a national event. So you do have, therefore, a combination of the global framework that will be presented today, which will try to argue that if you apply it as it has been applied in the context of a particular part of the world, namely the European region, that application, which has been terribly diligent and utterly vigorous in many ways, has not generated the expected dividends. And then Professor Saracino will try and explain why and offer some illustrations with lessons that are likely to be relevant for Egypt today, and indeed Egypt for tomorrow. So let me conclude by saying, by making sure that I acknowledge the contributions that have been made in the hosting of this event by our co-hosts, Mr. Planning, ENCC, and I will be remiss in terms of my responsibilities if I had not mentioned two of my colleagues in the Cairo office. And there's Daniela Zampini, who has tirelessly worked behind the scenes to make sure that this becomes a reality as an event. And of course, Mr. Mohammed Mustafa, a very young Egyptian economist with a lot of promise for the future. And these are the kind of Egyptians that we'd like to see come up over time. So on that note, thank you very much indeed.
Can I now ask Minister Rabawani to come to the podium?
Good evening, everyone. And I do apologize for coming late. I'm very sorry. We had a very long cabinet meeting, so we've just finished. I'm really happy and honored to be here to speak to such a distinguished group. Actually, I'm here to learn and listen. I'm not here to speak about the issues of linking the macroeconomic policies to employment. The room is full of experts and professors and practitioners. I will just tell you briefly what we are trying to do in the Ministry of Social Solidarity and how it links to the topic that we are discussing today. Actually, this government, this country, this society has come to realize that it is about jobs. It's not just about growth. We have been doing well 2005, 6, 7. We have been growing reasonably well. But we all know that the type of growth and the nature of growth that we had was not creating enough jobs for our youth. It was not labor intensive, it was not creating enough jobs, and the jobs that were created were not distributed equally. So the story of Egypt is a story of disparities, a story where parts are growing faster than others, regional disparities, sectors were growing faster than others, and also the quality of the jobs were not the jobs that youth were looking for, were not the jobs that were rewarding, and were not the jobs providing social protection. So we had, and we still have, a problem with creating enough jobs, quality jobs, and for specific groups of people. And I'm here really concerned with creating jobs for women, for instance. We are a country with a very, very young population, which is a great asset. But if this great asset is to continue to be an asset, these have to be productive assets. These have to be assets that are directed towards adding value and towards creating and becoming more productive. So what we have tried to do is take the necessary reforms with a very ambitious reform agenda on the economic side, realizing that there will be a greater need for social protection, and that there will be those who are left out and those who will not be able to catch up immediately because they have been already behind for a number of years and for decades. So we have parts of this country where poverty is higher than other parts, and 25% of the population lives in Upper Egypt, while 25% lives in Upper Egypt. We have there 70% of our poor. So the program that we have launched is a program of conditional cash transfers, and these conditional cash transfers have a very important condition that we are introducing to the cash transfers that this country has started in the 60s, which is the condition of education. Because linking to what we have just heard now, we have a disaster in the area of education, and the levels of illiteracy, the quality of education, and the skill set that we find in Upper Egypt and in many other places in the country makes it a real shame. So we really have to address this issue, and we really have to invest in human development. So what we have introduced are the cash transfers that are given to women in the family. So it targets women. Money does not go to the man in the family, but goes to the mother. And the mother is responsible for educating her children with a level of attendance that is not less than 80%. She needs to make sure that the kids are moving from a year to another, so the amount of money that is received increases with the number of years that are spent in school. So they get the base of £350, which is equivalent to the poverty line, but then we give them £60 for each child in primary schools, £80 for each child in preparatory schools, and £100 for each child in secondary school. With a very close tie with the schools. So we do follow and get reports on the schools at the village level as to where the kids are, whether the kids are going or not. We're using this program to make sure that kids are going to school. So we're trying to limit, child labor. We're trying to limit school dropping out, but we are also trying to ensure that there is an investment in those children, and that's why we're giving the money to the mother in the family. The other conditionality is a conditionality that is also very much related to human development indicators, which is health and nutrition. We have been seeing very alarming signals and indicators of weaker health, of stuntation, and also of malnutrition. The levels of malnutrition that we have been seeing in Upper Egypt are very close, if not worse, in some areas than Sub-Saharan Africa. This is a level that Egypt had never seen before. So there, the investment also has another condition, which is health and nutrition. So the children have to be taken. If they are not at school age, they have to go to the primary health care unit. They have health files. They have to take their vaccines. And we're seeing villages abstaining from vaccines in Egypt, in Upper Egypt, and this has happened in the last 2 or 3 years. Also, children have to have their regular identity papers, and those have to be, IDs have to be produced for every member in the family. And you need to know that we have 2 million women in this country with birth certificates and no IDs, and we have another 2 million women with no birth certificates and no IDs. So we have 4 million women who do not exist on our records. This is done for a very good reason and a very clever reason. They want women to marry at an earlier age, so they don't want them to give them a birth certificate. They do not want women to inherit land, so they do not want to give them a birth certificate. And also, in some places, it's simply not available. We have been working in Ayad and Atfih in Giza, and we have been to villages where in 2011, the Sigil Madani was just burned down with the police station, with everything. So for 3-4 years, they have been having children without giving them birth certificates. So they come with a couple of kids, and they say, we deserve the support, and when you ask for the birth certificates, they say, we never had one. So everything has to be automated, and everything has to be, they have to develop this file, and we help them develop those files. These conditionalities are modeled after the Latin American cash transfer models that we have seen work in Brazil, in Mexico, in Chile, called Bolsa Familia and Oportunidades and Chile Solidario. The Mexicans have done something that we have decided to adopt, and it's very much related to our topic today, which is they have moved from Oportunidades, which is the classic conditional cash transfer program, to something called Prospera. And Prospera is about jobs. It's about that people need to work, that conditional cash transfer are just an entry, an introductory solution, but people have to work. So a third conditionality is that they really have to work with us and accept the idea that the jobs are the solution and that we have to help them find jobs by increasing employability, providing them with training, providing them with access to finance. A member in the family has to work. And this conditionality is very important. We're working on different models so that we make sure that these families have a bread earner, and we hope that there are 2. And what we are trying to advocate for is that no family in Egypt can afford today to live on one breadwinner. There has to be 2 providers in the family if people are to make ends meet. So a lot of awareness work is happening. Work on accountability and transparency is also happening. And some of the most important work that is happening is linking the databases of NGOs in this country to the database of the ministry. We have some very large and important NGOs doing very similar activities. They are giving cash transfers to families. And these families have become experts in collecting cash transfers. So you find the same people going to an NGO after the other, collecting £100 here and £200 there and £50 there. And this is one of the reasons people do not work, because they're getting cash transfers that no one knows about and no one really is monitoring. So what we did is that we have worked very closely with a number of the largest NGOs. And these NGOs, if they have 10,000 beneficiaries, or if they give less than £100 a month, then we don't really bother them. But for those giving to 100,000, 200,000, £1.5 million beneficiaries and giving amounts under £200 and £300 a month then we really need to link our databases, and we really need to make sure and find out who's getting what, so that no one is left out. And if people are getting resources from different NGOs and government entities, we need to link this and have a deep look and a deep analysis of what is really happening on the ground. Not just linking databases of NGOs giving cash transfers, but also linking databases between ministries. And this is very important. Out of 1.5 million recipients of the solidarity transfer in my ministry, 250,000 deserve to have a family card and a ration card for food, and they were not getting it, simply because they did not have the papers to have it. So just sending those names to the Ministry of Supply helps provide them with an extra layer of protection by having access to the services of the Ministry of Supply and getting the food rations and so on. The work that is being done in the Ministry of Supply is also indirectly turning the food and the ration cards into a cash transfer, because they're giving points and they have the choice between different products, and they have also an incentive to save on their bread consumption and to save on their oil and rice and sugar consumption, because this allows them to move those points to another product. So that's a complementary work to the work that we're doing, and we're working very closely with the Ministry of Supply and sharing those databases. An important effort that is also being done is cleaning up those databases, because we've been getting people out without, you don't need to announce this, but you get people out once they start having identity papers, and once they start delivering documents, you find out that people need to be removed out of the beneficiary list. And when you show them the proof and why this is being done, they just accept it and they cannot refute it. So we're working with the Ministry of Agriculture to have the database of land ownerships, and this is very important. المساحة والأراضي الزراعية الحيازة, and this is another important database. It's more complex to get linked to the database of electricity, because most of us live in houses where not necessarily it's in the name of the head of the family. The electricity in villages, it's very complicated. So the Ministry of Electricity's database is not yet complete and ready. What we are working also on are linking, and we have done that. We have 44 million files of those on the pensions program, which is the social insurance and public insurance. So completing all these databases with the ID numbers was very important to start to link the services to the people and to know who is getting what. When we work on the ground, we find out that many of those who apply for a conditional cash transfer are capable and able of working. And this is the real challenge in this government, and this is the real challenge in this country, to go back to the topic of employment. We have people who are young, who are healthy, and who are either not working because they feel that the return is very low and it's not worth it, or because they are still looking for and hoping for a government job, or because they are there is nothing much happening in the village, so the economic activity is very, very limited, and the opportunity of regular jobs are very, very limited. And that's why we see more and more youth trying to go out of, migrate to places and countries where they hope to have a better opportunity, not working less, not willing to work more, but with the hope of getting a better return and a better income. It's even worse for women. We have less and less women working, and this is very alarming. However, the large projects, the mega infrastructure projects, have been able to help us reduce a little bit the unemployment problem, and bringing it down just a little bit, but not enough to cover for the numbers of youth graduating. We are also not just seeing a female face to unemployment, but we're also seeing university graduates face to unemployment. We find university graduates and the middle degree الشهادة المتوسطة are not finding jobs, while people who are less educated are able to find jobs. And this is very, very risky, because it is people are very clever, especially when they're poor. Just coping with poverty makes them very, very clever, and they tell you, why should I keep the kids in school if they're not going to end up having jobs, and getting them out of school and putting them into a job is much more rewarding. So the value of education is put at question if this education and this degree is not linked to a satisfying job. Just to give you a very quick comparison, we're working with a factory in Bani Suif that owns a shop in Zamalek. It's a garment industry, and the guy has a factory that can create 4,000 jobs. He's employing only 2,000 because he cannot find the other 2,000. We have been trying to help him by linking it to NGOs and giving incentives to NGOs so that they do training awareness and sessions, and they attract youth to work for the guy. And we haven't been able to find for those 2,000 jobs more than 200-300 people. On the other hand, the Social Insurance Authority has announced 2,900 jobs. When I just joined, the ad was there in the papers, and we have received 375,000 requests. So we had to empty 2 floors of the building where the offices are, just to put the requests in the files with the CVs and the birth certificates. This is more than 1/3 of 1 million files. And people have been bombarding us with questions. When are you going to be done? And actually it's taking forever, and we have tried to do it online, the application online, but people would come and bring you the files and apply for the jobs. When we announced 38 jobs in Nasser Bank, we received 13,000 requests. So people are still hoping and looking for this government job that provides them with pensions, that provides them with social security, that provides them with the safety and security of being protected in a work environment, especially for women, but also for men. And many of those people in the interviews do have already jobs, and they have good paying jobs, but they're willing to leave these jobs and move to a government job. So it's a cultural challenge, it's a social protection challenge, and we really have to try and attract all those working in the informal sector with a package of incentives that provides them with social security, with pensions, with health benefits, while staying and working in the private sector, because they see this as a job that does not provide security. If they become disabled, if they become sick, if they want to take time off for childcare, it's not as good as working in government. So the challenge is how to make the private sector attractive, how to reach the proper package of incentives to attract youth to work in the private sector and make it a place that people are productive but also are protected. So I just don't want to take more than that. These are the challenges that we are facing. We're trying to learn from what other countries have done. Definitely the answer is in education, in training, but also in culture, in awareness, and in breaking many of the taboos and being very honest about the issues that we are facing. And we really have to be very careful when we provide our conditional cash transfers that they are not too much, so that they do not encourage people to stop working, because the combination and the support that people are getting from NGOs and from government can reach in some places a point where it's not really rewarding to work. So social mobility, economic mobility has to be linked in this country to jobs for women, jobs for everyone, jobs in every family, and the value of work and the value of education are the things that we all as a society have to believe in and really advocate for. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Excellency. She gives me hope that one day we might see a woman Prime Minister in Egypt. There's 2 other women I would like to thank. Dr. Nihal Magharbil, Minister. If you don't know her, she's standing right here. She's working really very hard, and thank you for organizing this, Dr. Nihal. And another woman is Amina Ghalim, our Executive Director. Thank you, Amina.
Thank you, Amina.
Very quickly, the format today, Mr. Islam and our Food Security Chairman, Sub-Council Chairman, and the Vice Chairman of the Federation of Industries, Tariq, will moderate the panel, and then we'll open it for discussions and questions from your side. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Reda. You gave us an excellent overview of how macro policies in Egypt are working against employment promotion. Now we would like to hear a presentation from Professor Francesco Saraceno. I will just very briefly introduce Professor Francesco. He's a senior economist at Sciences Po, which is the university my children graduated from, and he holds two PhDs.
Have trouble with the cycle, so we don't care about long-term growth for the moment. And in some sense, it may be relevant also for a country like Egypt, where you are these very days trying to put together and to put in place a strategy for long-term growth. So, what is the discussion among policymakers on the long-term tendency of the economy to grow? And as you know, I'm sure you heard and you read about it, there is a tendency of a certain consensus, once again, that emerges on the fact that the economy is heading towards, the global economy here I'm talking about, I'm not talking about a particular country, the global economy is heading towards a period of lower growth rates than in the past. The first guy who started this discussion is Northwestern economist Bob Gordon, and Bob wrote a paper in 2012 where he resuscitated, the term secular stagnation dates back from the 30s, the first time it was used, and Gordon took it back from the grave, I would say, and said, well, we face a period of lower growth in the future. And the reason why we face this period of lower growth is because technology will not be what it used to be. So it's really a supply side vision of secular stagnation. He lists a number of problems. We have demographics. It's a problem in Egypt. This is very, very European and American, if you want. We have, and this is instead very important, I think, for you, it's related to what the minister was saying, we have increasing inequality that results in lower accumulation of human capital, because the more inequality you have, the less people have access to education and to instruction. We heard a number of examples of how this problem is being tackled here in Egypt just a few minutes ago. We have, of course, and this is important for middle-income economies and for advanced economies, we have a wider pool of workers that is given by globalization, and that leads to a sort of leveling down of wages, which also leads to lower productivity, because there is causation from wages to productivity. And you have so the cost of global warming and a number of other headwinds, as he calls them. He says, he names 6 of them. All of them tend to reduce the capacity of the economy to produce. So tend to reduce this potential I mentioned before. So it's really a supply side view. And during the crisis, a number of economists, the most active in this was Larry Summers, tended to give a different, and in my opinion, rather interesting view on secular stagnation by saying, well, you know what? The problem is not only in the supply side of the economy, but it's also in the demand side of the economy. We are heading towards a period when there will be a chronic deficiency of aggregate demand. And this is, I think, very important when you design policies to increase the capacity of the economy to produce, that you also make sure that you are increasing at the same time the capacity of the economy to absorb the goods you produce. Otherwise, you end up with an imbalance, and eventually growth will falter again, because the non-used productive capacity will depreciate and vanish. And so there is no point in having hundreds of thousands of graduates and very large investment projects if then there is no capacity to sell the goods that these guys produce. Eventually the plants will be closed and these people will go unemployed and lose their skills. So the idea of Larry Summers is that for a number of reasons we have 2 phenomena that happen. The first is that demand for investment tends to be much lower than it used to be. People tend to invest much less. A little bit for the reasons that Gordon said. You have too much debt, too little technical progress, too little productivity, etc., etc. And on the other, among other things, because of increasing inequality, you have a huge mass of savings that enter into the economy. And if you have very little demand for investment and a lot of savings, what happens is, I have some special effects here, what happens is a new equilibrium of the economy in which the interest rate at which you have full employment becomes negative. So the equilibrium interest rate for the economy is below zero, and it's not very easy to reach an interest rate that is zero. This is the version of the zero lower bound of the liquidity trap that is now dominant in the United States. And if you try to push the economy through monetary policy, either you cannot do it because you stop at zero, you hit the zero lower bound, or you do it, but how do you do it? You create bubbles that artificially inflate the economy, but then lead to crisis. We had one in the late 90s with the ICT bubble, and we had one with the housing market in between 2004 and 2008. So Summers says we are in this situation where the only way to guarantee the same growth rates we had in the past is to go from bubble to bubble. So if we want more growth, we need to pay that with more instability. Let's forget Paul Krugman, even if I like a lot what he says, it's just a detail, so I won't waste your time on that. How do we solve this situation of secular stagnation, according to these guys? Well, you cannot use monetary policy. You need to act on the supply and on the demand side of the economy at the same time. So, reduce income inequality. By doing that, you increase demand. Reduce debt. Summers is one of the economists who has been most ardent in calling, for example, for a restructuring of the Greek debt. He says the Greek will never pay their debt, so just forget about it. It's bringing down their economy and it will never be repaid. So reduce debt, reduce inequality, build incentives for consumption and for investment. And both Krugman, Blanchard and Summers, all the economists who have been dealing with that, also say don't try to use monetary policy beyond its limits, start using fiscal policy, which is exactly the opposite of what we did in Europe, by the way. So, I'm heading towards the end. I'm perfectly on time, for once in my life. So, to this debate have been added a number of interesting contributions that have been arguing that this idea that the long run, the potential of the economy is completely disconnected from the short run is not reasonable, it doesn't work. And I cite here two papers, and just cite those two papers because they came out in the past 2 weeks. The Fantastic and Summers is mid-October, the Blanchard et al. Is last week, it's 10 days ago. And these two papers basically show how the crisis has brought down substantially the potential of the economy. And more importantly, especially the first paper, they show that given that the so-called multiplier, so the impact of fiscal policy on economic activity is much larger than what we believed before the crisis, the austerity policies that have been carried on in European countries have led to a huge, they're very stupid, I agree with you, they led to a decrease of growth, and more importantly, this decrease of growth was not just temporary, it was permanent. So this potential growth with all the flows it has, they show went down as well because of austerity. That is Fatas and Summers. And what they add towards the end is that not only this recession, this austerity decreased substantially short and long-term growth. In addition to that, it was sort of self-defeating because the debt reduction was lower than the GDP reduction. Given that the debt ratio is a ratio, if the denominator goes down less than the numerator, the ratio goes up. And I will show you a picture in a few minutes. Blanchard et al. Basically add to that a distinction between recessions that are demand-driven and recessions that are supply-driven, and they show that regardless of where the recession comes from, it may have permanent effect. So you can have a typical Keynesian recession, or you can have a technology shock, a negative technology shock. This doesn't change, and in the end, the economy is permanently growing at a lower pace. That is the first result. And the second result, which is interesting, is that they show that the Phillips curve has become much flatter than before. So what you can have very large swings in unemployment without big changes in inflation. That is, I think, very much advanced economy specific. I don't think that an emerging economy like Egypt could use this result. And it's mostly due to the fact that there is a certain confidence of markets that monetary policy will never allow hyperinflation to explode again. But I mean, the main point of these two papers, and of many others, I repeat, now it has become almost fashionable to say that austerity is bad for growth. It used to be heretic, now it's more or less consensual, is that you have an impact which is not only short run but also long run. And that is, I think, I will come to that in my last slide, this gives us lots of lessons also for policy in normal times, like the times that is going through Egypt right now. So, just to summarize, we have a problem with the notion of potential output. We have a problem with the idea that cycle and trend are completely disconnected. And we have a problem with short-term policies, like macroeconomic policies, like fiscal policy, like austerity, that actually have a very strong impact on trend growth. So, the last question I will ask today with you is, if this is true, if long and short-term growth are linked, how do we coordinate policies for long growth, the so-called structural reform, and policies for short-term growth, the so-called macroeconomic policy? And here we have a couple of, I will start with what the consensus has to say, the consensus I mentioned at the very beginning. And the perfect example of this consensus is Mario Draghi, the ECB president, who gave a very interesting speech. For those who are interested, I can send it by email, the link. He gave a very interesting speech a few months ago at the ECB forum on central banking. And basically the story is, well, fiscal countries were too fiscally irresponsible, and this created the crisis. Well, wait, no, it's not true. No, it's not true, actually. Countries were not fiscally irresponsible. But you know what? Still do fiscal consolidation. So there was a shift of argument, but not a shift of policy prescription. That is a very interesting thing. It's a little bit like what's happening in the US, where people keep saying inflation will come up, and they come up with lots of reasons why inflation will increase, and it never increases, so they find another reason. And that is more or less the same thing. Draghi said, until a few months ago, fiscally responsible countries caused the crisis. Now he says, well, maybe it's more complicated, the euro had structural flows, there were imbalances, etc., but still do fiscal consolidation. So the policy prescription did not change at all. Second part of the consensus, and this comes to Summers and secular stagnation, we cannot do anything with monetary policy. In 2 days, the day after tomorrow, on Thursday, the ECB will step up its quantitative easing, and while they are stepping up their quantitative easing, they are also telling us it will not be very useful, because it doesn't work. It's not what should be done. Right? And what should be done is, you don't have fiscal policy because you have to continue consolidation. You cannot do monetary policy because you are in liquidity trap. What are we left with? Structural reforms. So the consensus says structural reforms are the key for growth, even if you are in a recession like the one Europe is living in right now, which is based given by the fact that there is insufficient demand for the goods that are produced. And so the idea is, suffer now, go through austerity, and that will solve all your problems. And let me show you how we solve our problems. This is, those who were in Egypt saw this picture, I'm recycling my work. This is, I think, the better illustration of the problems of Europe. This is Greece. And I took a number of macroeconomic variables, and I said, okay, let's assume that these variables are 100 in 2007, and let's see what happens through the crisis. And you have the red line is GDP, the blue line is consumption, then you have domestic demand in purple, and in pink you have private investment. And green, of course, is public debt. I would like you to notice two things. First of all, 5 years of Troika programs, IMF, ECB, and Commission programs led to a still unsustainable and growing debt ratio. So the result of Summers and Fatah's that austerity is self-defeating applies to Greece. Greece did austerity, and yet its debt position is still unsustainable. Second, Greece lost 25% of its GDP. So austerity had a huge negative impact on Greece in the short term. And Draghi could say, yes, that is a necessary sacrifice, a necessary price you have to pay, a short-term pain, because you want to have a long-term gain. So this austerity has made you more competitive. And then I would like to look at the last. Thank you very much. I would like to look at the last line, which is the pink line, investment. For every euro Greece invested, this is gross investment, so it includes the replacement of depreciated capital. For every euro they spent in 2007, they now spend 36 cents. So let me ask you a question. Suppose that tomorrow, by magic, everything else goes up, including investment, by the way. All the situation in Greece, by a magic wand, becomes rosy, and demand goes back. Everybody wants sweet tzatziki and dolmades and moussaka, and we have a huge boom for the Greek economy. What will happen? How much tzatziki will a country that only invests 30 cents out of $1 in it invested 5 years ago can produce now? What is the situation of the capital stock of Greece 7 years after the crisis? The capital stock of Greece has melted. And let me tell you something. A few years ago, 2 years ago, I think, 3 years ago, 2013, it's two, came out a very interesting piece on Lancet, a medical magazine, and the impact of austerity on healthcare in Greece. And they showed that some of the things you would believe they will never change, like infant mortality, life expectancy, etc., have been dropping dramatically since the crisis. So the public health situation of Greece has also been affected negatively by austerity. And education. And universities that have been closing for a quarter, for more than a quarter. And these are things, I will come back to that later, these are things that once a generation doesn't get education, that generation will remain in the labor market for 40 years. So that will be a dent in your human capital stock that is not disappearing the day the crisis is over. So this is a typical example of how the recession leads to a decrease in your potential output, meaning leads to a decrease even in your long run well-being. And so the slogan is not short-term pain for long-term gain, but in my opinion, it's short-term pain for long-term pain again. And this is also a picture that some of you have already seen. It is the World Economic Forum Competitiveness Index. I think in this house you have seen it and discussed it. And it shows how many positions countries lost or gained from 2006 to 2013. And as you can see, all the countries in the core of the Eurozone, Germany, Finland, and Netherlands, became more competitive during the crisis, not after the crisis. Whereas all the countries in crisis who have gone through austerity and reform programs have actually lost competitiveness. So you reform your economy, but reforming it at the wrong time, leads to a loss of competitiveness. Timing is absolutely crucial, because it's impossible to say, well, Greece is okay, Greece has no problem, Greece has a very vibrant economy and these nasty Germans killed the Greek economy. Greece, of course, has huge structural problems, as well as Italy, as well as Egypt, I guess, as well as Spain or Portugal. These countries all have very strong structural problems. So the point is not whether these countries need structural reforms. The problem is when these structural reforms happen. And there is an interesting piece by Danny Roderick, a Turkish economy working at Princeton, who wrote in 2013 an editorial on Project Syndicate, in which he shows, he explains basically that if you do that structural reforms imply by definition a destruction of capacity, because you have to move resources from sector to sector, from job to job, from skill to skill, and that is costly. And this cost can be borne and absorbed by the economy only if the economy is doing well. You destroy jobs in an efficient sector, you need to have the efficient sector which is growing, which has demand, so that it can absorb the workers that are leaving the inefficient sector. And so if you do structural reforms, if you do that operation during a period of recession, when even the efficient sector has trouble selling its goods, the job destruction in the efficient sector will not lead to a job creation in the inefficient sector, and the result will be that the reform will be self-defeating because total productivity will not increase. So what is crucial is that the sequencing, that basically what is crucial is that the consensus completely neglects that economic processes take place in time, and the sequencing of policies is as important as the policies themselves. And this is something that is forgotten too often by policymakers, especially in Europe. But not only in Europe, actually. Two very quick remarks. The first is that I'm not saying something which is completely new. A paper that was pretty much in the news for once, because it's an academic paper, it's very complicated, but it made some noise in the policy debate. It's a paper by Eggerson and co-authors in 2014, where they show that structural reforms, even assuming that their impact in the long run is positive, so we don't ask the question whether the reform is good or bad. We assume the reform is good, and they show that in certain conditions, this reform can still harm the economy. And they can still harm the economy precisely because they lead to a shortage of demand in the short run. The shortage of demand in the short run defeats the reform. And so the conclusion is, like Roderick said, don't do reforms in bad times, do them in good times. Let me skip that. I'm also working on that with a co-author. We have a paper in which we show precisely that what is important is that you keep stable the flow of investment in human and physical capital, so that you don't have holes in the stock, because these holes, once they're there, they're impossible to fill, especially for human capital. It's even more important than for physical capital. And so what we conclude in our paper is that, the paper to be written actually, so we just have the model, but we didn't read the paper yet. But what we conclude in this, what our model shows is that you need proactive fiscal and monetary policy to provide the demand that may be lacking from the private sector during the transition, and to provide the financing to firms. So what is crucial is a stable flow of revenues for firms. That is the only thing that will lead to constant flows of investment and to the capacity of the economy to restructure itself and change its configuration. So, just a few remarks for conclusion. This is the last slide. I abused of your patience in Alpha. So the first thing, and I think this is important, I mean, it emerged in the discussions we had today and in past days about Egypt. Whenever you put in place a long-term policy of whatever type it is, make sure that the macroeconomic framework that goes with it is appropriate and adapted. And most notably, I see a very dangerous combination of structural reforms and restrictive fiscal and monetary policy. It's very hard to keep together the reduction of budget deficits and the structural reforms to boost the economy. And this is something that is done, for example, in Europe, but it's also a temptation in many other countries. And if I understood correctly, it's one of the issues here in Egypt as well. Second, sequencing is important, as I say, and you can see the difference between the huge transformation of the East Asian economies that went very gradually into the process reform and did one after the other, and, for example, the Big Bang reform in Russia that cost 7 years of loss of GDP. Third, you need to have constant, over time, capacity building. So everything, and if you want markets to work properly, the macroeconomic context needs to be as smooth as possible so that you guarantee this constant flow of investment in human and physical capital. And finally, I think it's important that policymakers who want to try to boost the potential refrain from very short-term objectives. It's very important that you take a long-term perspective. Of course, I understand the necessity of politicians to go in front of their voters one day after election and say, okay, thanks to me, things have already changed. And it's very hard to say, no, thanks to me, things will change in 10 years. It's much harder to sell. But I mean, it's the job of those of us who are not politicians, let me to say that. And so, thank you very much.